Okay, everyone, I'm going to walk you through an example of doing some photo editing. I'm sorry this is vertical, but you're probably going to be editing vertically, and so I want you to be able to see the controls like you will see them when you're doing some edits. So one of the spin-off accounts that we have from the dog account is one where I post chickens from Key West. There's wild chickens all over Key West and most of the Keys. And so I take lots of pictures of them. This is one I took yesterday. This chicken was running away from me. I just kind of threw the camera at it to see if I could get a good picture. And amazingly, it ended up like right in the middle of the frame. And so it's got this kind of cool background, which I hadn't even noticed. So we're going to try to turn this into a social media worthy chicken picture. The first thing that we're going to check for something like this is if it's in focus, because it looks, pretty good, but sometimes if you get up close, it's blurry, and those just are not as engaging. It's hard to really get to the intensity of what's there. So we're going to zoom in on this chicken's face. That's pretty good. Like you can, there's no motion blur. You can see all the details pretty well. So it passes that test. Now I have an iPhone 11 Pro, and so that actually has pretty good controls. If I were just trying to throw something up really quick, I may do this process. So click on Edit. I'll do the Auto Enhance, which tends to help. And then I always tend to go to Brilliance and crank that up. And also Vibrance, which brings up the color without making it look too fake. And that definitely is better. If we tap, we can compare this to the original versus the enhanced. So that's quite an improvement. But there's other things about this photo that I don't like that I would want to change. One is that there's this perspective that makes it look like I'm looking down. Like if you look at the fence slats, they look wider apart at the top than the bottom. I like my photos to look like they're straight on, and so that's something that we can correct. I may clean up that gum stain on the sidewalk, and I just want a little finer control over the colors. So we're going to cancel this out, and we're going to go work with this in Lightroom. So I actually imported it in there already. If you don't know how to do that, you can just launch Lightroom and pick something off your camera. You can also sometimes do the share button down in the lower left and then go directly to Lightroom that way. Okay, so here we have the chicken in Lightroom. I'm going to walk you again just through the process that I would go through with this. So you're going to do this in real time with me as I, try stuff out. So I always start by going to optics down here at the bottom and turning both of these on, which just correct for any weird lens things. They're pretty subtle, but they never make it worse. And so that's always a good place to start. The next thing that I want to do is fix that sort of geometry, and I'll do the cropping. So make sure I've got this correct. So if we click on geometry, up here at the top, there's this pull down menu. Right now it says off. This gives you some ways that it can actually correct the geometry and perspective of your photo. So auto usually does a very good job. And you can see what that did now. The stripes between the fence slats, those are straight up and down. So this looks much more like it's a straight on photo. Let's just take a look at a couple other options. If we do level, that has put it back in the weird perspective, and so that's not really helpful. If we do full, that actually doesn't look too bad here. Sometimes it will really distort things, so stuff in the front will be very spread out, and stuff in the middle will look kind of normal. But auto looks like the best option for what I want. Now that has added these white spaces to the top left and right, because it's basically pinched the photo in up there. And so that's a good time for us to go look at cropping, and we can also straighten things out. So we're going to scroll on the bottom over to crop, and then I will start by pulling in the edges to get rid of those white spaces. And it feels like it's not quite straight, so I can turn the little wheel at the bottom, and you can see it puts in guidelines until that looks mostly straight. As we pull around the corners here, you can see it's giving us guidelines to divide the photo into thirds, which hopefully you read about the rule of thirds. You don't always have to do that, so I may want to line the fence up in the bottom third, but that makes a chicken look not quite right. So I'm going to have the chicken in the middle. I'll maybe zoom it in a little bit there, because I really like that cloud on the fence, so I don't want to lose that. find the right level. So that looks pretty good. So the main body of the chicken is in the middle. We got the head and the tail hanging out. Click OK. Okay, so that feels like a pretty good level of zoom. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is adjust lighting and color, and we're going to start with lighting because this definitely feels too dark like it is. So there's a few options you have here. Sometimes I use the curve, and if we click on that, this gives you this option where you can kind of click and drag around the curve. You'll just kind of get a feel for this. So if I drag it up, like the chicken looks really good like this. I still would want to do some color adjustment. The background is all washed out. That could be okay. We can adjust the background separately. So let's see if we click done and just sort of zoom in on the chicken. That looks pretty good. So let's stick with it like that. Let me undo that really quick just so you can see some other options. So another way you could go about it if the curve doesn't give you what you want is you might pull up the exposure, and that's matching a lot of what we got on the curve. Look at some adjustments in brightness and contrast. And just one guideline here I know I've said, but just to make it clear, if you adjust for one part of the photo, like the chicken, you may sacrifice quality in the other part, like the background. Pick one part that you're adjusting for and make that look good, because then you can go back in and deal with the rest. So we can always make that background look better later. We want to get the chicken looking right. So that looks pretty good. And then we may adjust the highlights. That's not doing too much. Shadows. Now if we take all the shadows out, like that looks kind of washed out. It looks a little dark there, so we could bring that up a little bit. And highlight the blacks a little more. So that's not bad. I kind of liked the effect from the curve better. So if I undo all those changes that I just made, that's what we started with, and bring the curve up a little. Now see, now I'm not liking it as much. Okay, so let's undo the curve and we'll go back and do that here. So get the exposure about right. Bring up the shadows and then bring the blacks. Okay, that's pretty good. If we zoom in on our chicken, so the color's kind of messed up, like the face looks kind of faded out. We'll fix that. But I like that we've brought out a lot of the color differences in the chicken with the lightness. And so we're going to leave the light there for now. We may come back and adjust later. And we're going to go over to color. I always like to start by increasing the vibrance of the color. So there's vibrance and saturation. Saturation will just make the colors more intense. So if we drag that all the way up, you see that they're very intensely bright colors. It looks kind of fake like that, so we're just going to leave that where it was. Vibrance also brings out the colors, but it does it sort of in an easier way. So if we bring it all the way up, that's a little too much for the chicken, though the background looks good. So let's just get the chicken right. That looks pretty good on the chicken. My main worries at this point are that the legs do look sort of faded out, and the head looks a little faded out, but the body of the chicken looks pretty good. So those are some adjustments we want to do. Everything outside the chicken looks faded. So let's go in and adjust that. To do that, we're going to go on the bottom over to selective. And selective is going to let you edit different parts of the image. So we're going to take this rectangle one and basically just get it so the whole image looks kind of like covered in red. That's all stuff that's going to be edited. Then we're going to click on let's undo that. There we go. Okay, so we're going to get that all red, and then we're going to click on this eraser, and I'm going to need to edit that a bit. Okay, so the eraser, you can see if I touch and move, it's taking parts out of that red. So that lets us take out parts that won't be edited. Clearly, it's too coarse-grained at this point. I want to take out just the chicken, not the space around it. So I'm going to undo that. And you can see there's two circles here on the left. The top one is the size, and so if you press and hold on that, you can see there's a red dot in the middle. If you move your finger up while you're holding, it gets bigger. You move it down, it gets smaller. The second dot is the feather, so if you press and hold on that, that is basically how fuzzy are the edges, and higher is fuzzier. So we're going to go about here. So we get kind of fuzzy edges, but a smaller brush. And then make sure that we've clicked on the eraser, which is the second thing from the top. So that means we're going to take parts out of this. And now I'm going to zoom in and very carefully highlight the parts of the chicken. And of course I just did the head, but I want the head to be more intense too, so maybe I'll undo that and we'll leave the head. So the head's going to get adjusted along with the background. Now as I'm doing that, you can let go and then continue erasing with another press, so you don't have to do it all like with your finger held down and never check your work. Okay, so you can see on the bottom there I've missed a little bit. Hopefully that won't mess it up. If it does, we'll go back and re-edit. Just like with the head, I'm going to leave the legs as they are because I want those to be not as washed out. Okay, so I'm probably being a little conservative here with my brush size. Okay, so now we have our chicken selected. Okay, so now I'm going to go to light and I'm going to bring the contrast back up, the exposure down a bit. Oh, okay, it's taking a second to respond here. Not quite that much. Okay, so that looks really good on the background. Now, if we come down here, you can see this little edge where I kind of missed the outside of the chicken. I think it's okay. Like, you can't really tell too much with the background, so we'll leave it like that. And then bring up the saturation a little bit on that. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm still wondering if I should be bothered about that. Okay, so let's say okay to those selective edits. Okay, that is not bad. Let's go in here one more time, over to selective. And then if we click on the little square, which was our previous selection, we can zoom in here and decide, do I want to add or adjust this in any way? So I can kind of drag it around a little bit. I think I'm just going to go with it. If I were doing this without a video tutorial, I may go back in and fix that little light underneath the chicken there. But I think this is pretty good as is. So let's go ahead and save that. So we'll click OK. So if I'm done here, I can go ahead and save, and you'll do that by clicking the share icon at the top and do export to camera roll. So let's see, is there anything else I want to correct in here? I might want to take out this little gum stain there. To do that, I'm going to click on healing. Just like before, we have the two brushes, the two circles here, where you can tap and drag and it will give you a brush size. So I'm going to draw over that gum stain and it will automatically pick a spot to fill in. Usually it does a pretty good job picking. If it's picked something weird, you can click in the spot that's selected and drag that around and you can see it'll give you different stuff to put in, but I'm going to put it basically back where it was. Okay, so that's gone. We may as well do this one down here even though it's not a big deal. Okay, so that's picked as sort of bad spot, so I'm going to drag this back down here. All right, and now our gum stains are gone. Okay, so let's save this, export to camera roll. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to our photos. We'll get rid of that intermediate one. So here's the new one that we have, and there's the original. So that's a lot better. That makes a big difference. I am still bothered by that light that got messed up at the bottom, so I'll probably go back in and adjust that. But generally that's the idea. So you can take a photo that's actually a pretty good picture by itself, but really enhance it in a way that makes it much more interesting for social media, that makes it much more engaging. And, I spent a lot of time on little nitpicky things here, but generally you'll be able to do these kinds of adjustments very quickly and make something that is so much better, and is really more likely to get shared, more likely to engage your audience.